As South Africa presented its case at the International Court of Justice, supporters of Palestine gathered outside.
Thanks for South Africa. I just wrote a banner that says it takes an oppressed to recognize and free another oppressed. So thank you, South Africa. We hope this will stop the genocide.
I feel like I'm sitting in a historical moment. I can't believe that all these judges came and prepared all these cases for something that we've been talking about for years and heard from our parents and the parents of our friends. And they have all the evidence, and it is validating everything that we know. It is finally validating all the words, exactly how it's being used. Every statement that they say, there's a video against it. It's very clear, finally, for the whole world to see that we need our freedom, and what is happening is an unjust occupation.
To protest against this genocide, actually, yeah. And it's been like 1 week that I came from Gaza, actually. I was living like there for 85 days. And I witnessed this genocide, unfortunately.
Are you from Gaza?
Yes.
How is the situation in Gaza?
Incredibly bad, like even no one can imagine what's going on there. Like, nowhere to express, actually. Nowhere to express.
Continue now to get reaction. Our correspondent joining us from Tel Aviv, Trent Murray. Trent, thank you so much for your time. Trent, as we continue, of course, to get reaction following South Africa's presentation at the ICJ, I'm reading a statement here by the United Nations of Geneva saying that we commend South Africa for bringing this case to the ICJ at a time when the rights of Palestinians in Gaza are being violated with impunity. What are you hearing on your end?
Well, certainly this case has been watched closely today from Israel, as you might imagine. Most of the major networks here were running that live feed from the ICJ, although notably they weren't bringing in much of the audio, I have to say. Most of them had anchors and commentators speaking just over the pictures. But we are getting some official reaction from the government to what the SA legal team had to say. I'll just read a little bit of what the Ministry for Foreign Affairs spokesperson has said. They said South Africa's case was one of the greatest displays of hypocrisy in history, accusing Pretoria of functioning as the legal arm for Hamas and ignoring the fact that Hamas terrorists infiltrated Israel, murdered, executed, slaughtered, raped and kidnapped Israeli civilians. They go on to say that South Africa seeks to allow Hamas to return to commit the war crimes, crimes against humanity and sexual crimes that they committed repeatedly on October 7th. Now, that type of strong rhetoric is not new. It's very similar to what I heard last week from Elon Levy, the government spokesperson, and I guess we will just have to wait to see now what Israel has to say in the court. That, of course, comes tomorrow when they're given the opportunity to respond officially to SA.
When you look at that statement and, of course, the utterances that were made soon after South Africa made its application at the International Court of Justice, what does one then, deduct in terms of what Israel's position is likely to be at the court tomorrow when it presents its case? It also has 3 hours, and time that has been stipulated to South Africa.
Yeah, so look, reading a lot of the analysis here and what a lot of Israeli legal experts have been discussing around the likely defence, it's kind of broken up into 4 separate areas. The first one will focus on the fact that civilians are always the civilian casualties, are always unintentional results of war, and the fact that Hamas is entrenching itself in areas that are filled with civilians, including housing and hospitals. And actually, some of the media today criticised the SA case, Israeli media, for not mentioning the fact that Hamas is infiltrating itself and attacking Israeli troops from within civilian areas. We also are expecting the defence to point out the fact that millions of paper leaflets have been dropped on Gaza warning civilians to evacuate, and thousands of text messages and telephone calls have been sent. They say that points to a country that's not trying to commit genocide, but is actually trying to warn civilians of fighting and to get them out of harm's way. We're also expecting some of those comments which the South African team used so effectively, I think you have to say, comments by senior Israeli ministers, some of their rhetoric, which was very alarming in nature. Well, we expect the legal team for Israel will say those comments were either taken out of context or they just are robust debate in a democracy. They don't reflect official policy. And then I think the final one, probably one they'll rely less strongly on, but some legal commentators are here discussing it, is suggesting, look, the power of the Israeli army is one that if it wanted to commit genocide, the conflict in Gaza could look a lot different, but they are showing restraint and they are not just blindly carpet bombing areas, but they are trying to get civilians out of the way. Look, that will be the argument. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see how effectively they push that forward and how the judges respond. But as I say, make no mistake, they have seen and watched today what SA had to say, but they are now lining up for their time to respond.
And now, of course, we know that the ICJ decisions are final, they're binding, and of course are not subject to appeal. What is the likelihood then of the next steps in terms of should this case, go for South Africa? What is then the expectation from Israel?
Well, look, I feel that probably the more significant element of this we need to focus on is not necessarily the long-term verdict around the definition of genocide. That's going to take a lot of time in the court. It's that interim injunction that South Africa is asking for, effectively asking the judges to say, look, there's a plausible case here, so while that case is discussed, we're asking you to basically put a restraining order on Israel and its military actions in Gaza. Now, if the judges agree to that, then that really could reshape this entire war, because it could place huge pressure on Israel to have to abide by an ICJ ruling to halt its military operations while this case takes place. Now, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but if we just think about this logically, they then have two choices. They either agree to that and abide by it, in which case we will just see a complete major change on the ground, one would expect, or they ignore it. And then that places huge international pressure on the likes of Washington and Germany, some of Israel's closest allies, to continue to support Israel if they're in breach of an ICJ ruling. So, I think the one thing that everyone here can agree with, whether they're up in the West Bank right now supporting the Palestinian side or whether they're in Israel supporting the Israeli argument, I think what everyone agrees is just the significance of this case that has been brought before the ICJ by South Africa. It could have real lasting implications.
All right, Trent, thank you so much for your update.